So, hi everybody, and welcome to our podcast, Phil Myers podcast. I'm Paul Farren, and I'm here with John Butler, whose Papi Chulo is coming out this Friday, June 7th. John, thank you so much for coming in.
Thanks for having me.
I loved Papi Chulo.
Thank you.
I'd like you to give the synopsis to our listeners.
Yeah, sure. It's a comedy about loneliness, basically, and it's about a solitary and alienated weatherman in Los Angeles who's given gardening leave from work for a breakdown on air that happens at the very start of the film, and he decides to do some home repairs and hires a Latino migrant worker to help him paint his deck. And despite a language barrier and clear kind of cultural differences, this white weatherman and this Latino migrant worker develop a kind of odd couple friendship that plays out over the streets of Los Angeles. So it's it's in a kind of tradition of odd couple buddy movies that I've seen and loved down the years. It's got maybe a hint of Lost in Translation about it, maybe a little bit of Sideways as well. But it's just about kind of strangers connecting in a huge city, and Los Angeles plays itself.
You're very familiar with Los Angeles, am I right? Or California anyway,
Yeah.
because you spent some time there. Tell me a little bit about where the idea for the film came originally.
Yeah, I've spent so much time there over the years. I lived in San Francisco for a long time and lived in LA for a bit as well. And I love it over there. And I'm always very defensive of LA when I come back to these parts of the world, because everybody's like, oh, don't you need a car to go everywhere? And I'm like, you drive to Spar to get your cigarettes. So, it is, of course, vast, and there is a lot of cars and there is a lot of vapid celebrity and all that, but it's also incredibly beautiful and interesting and has lots of diversity and great art and great culture. So yeah, it's a city that I always thought was represented in a way that I didn't recognize so well on film, and I really relished the idea of making a film about LA as I saw it. But I also loved the idea of a lonely weatherman, because whenever I'm watching the weather forecast, I just think it's one of the most kind of existential jobs in the world, standing in front of a green screen and attempting to predict what's happening with our planet.
It did sound like a sexier job in LA than it might be in Dublin, though.
Well, the one thing I will say is at least you got a bit of variety here. It's like, today there's some fog, whereas in LA it's just like sun, and then apocalyptic downpour, and then sun.
Yeah, it reminded me of the Fast Shows joke, Scorchio.
Yeah, no, they don't have much to do over there, the weathermen, until something apocalyptic happens. Yeah.
I have never been to LA, so I can't talk other than saying it was a very unusual look at the landscape, but the film for me was a wonderful two-hander. There are a lot of other characters in there, and there's a lot going on, but it essentially is a two-hander, and you use locations in a very tightly constructed way. Yeah. I mean, you avoided the Hollywood sign, and you avoided a lot of so-called LAisms, would I be right?
I think absolutely, yeah. I mean, LA is kind of divided by freeways, and I didn't go really to the west of the 405 or the 10, which is where the LA that you see more often is found, like the beach, the boardwalk in Venice and Santa Monica, and all that side of it, which is perfectly nice and decent, I suppose. But the LA that I knew and that I always gravitated towards was to the east, which was more culturally diverse and more queer and poorer, and further up in the mountains and further away from the water, And so for a story about kind of being emotionally parched, it just felt like the right place to go. But also it was the LA, Echo Park, Silver Lake, Atwater, Highland Park, all those less heralded neighborhoods up in the hills were the ones that really interested me. I would never gravitate towards Bel Air anyway, because they'd have me shot. So you go where you feel welcome. And that for me was always East LA. Yeah.
Yeah, I love the views from that hiking part of the world that I've heard so much about.
Yeah, that's Runyon Canyon, or it's meant to be Runyon Canyon. It's actually Griffith Park, but Runyon Canyon is where you see like unbelievably manicured and kind of well made up supermodels and Instagram influencers walking their tiny dogs, and the dogs are wearing sweaters even though it's like 400 degrees, and they're kind of there's some amazing overhearing that you can do on those hikes. You frequently see famous people, and it's a real kind of cultural institution in LA. It's like walking the seafront in Bray.
Okay, that's perfectly brilliant explanation. Everyone will understand that.
Yeah, it's a seafront parade, but it goes uphill.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What was interesting about it was it felt like there was the only bit of nature that people knew to go to that were of a certain ilk within the LA class system.
Yeah, well, that's it. The Silver Lake of Silver Lake is a reservoir, and that tells you everything you need to know about LA.
Yeah.
The beauty is very dry, and that's why the property prices by the sea are so high. It's cooler over there, but it's also much more. It doesn't feel as intense because it's not, you can look out and see blue, whereas it can't be overstated how brown the hills get in LA when there hasn't been rain for a year. And it's, it's beautiful in a way that's totally alien to us Europeans, and I find it fascinating. It's kind of woozy and narcotic in a way because the heat has you slightly out of your mind. And, more often than not, I'm jet lagged when I'm there as well. And also everybody's smoking legal marijuana, so everybody's a little bit high all the time. And then the music and the art that they favor over there is all like incredibly down-tempo, mellow stuff. And so what I'm trying to say, I suppose, is that culturally the mindset there is just attuned differently, and it feels quite foreign, literally, to an Irishman over there. And I just wanted to try and capture a little bit of that atmospheric wooziness on film.
So it was always... your weatherman story, and our Mexican friends from East LA. What part of LA would that be now? Well,
Alejandro Patiño, the actor who plays Ernesto and who's a terrific actor, he is born and bred in Compton, so he's from East LA himself. Mm-hmm. But the idea was that Ernesto, the character, is from Nayarit in Mexico, which is where Alejandro's father in real life is from.
So he is an illegal immigrant.
Yes.
Okay, I gather that from as I said, the way all the men lined up outside the hardware stores looking for that little bit of work.
Yeah, it's like Cricklewood was in the 70s and 60s in London, where it was like Irish navvies looking for a day's work. And I think now that's when you're in Kilburn and Cricklewood, you see Lithuanians and Polish guys doing the same. In LA, it is universally 100% Latino migrant workers. You never ever see anybody who isn't Latino outside, which was an interesting thing to observe as a person visiting from overseas, because you just kind of notice those things in a way that people who are native to there don't. Like if an American comes over here, they'll have lots of interesting observations about our country. But it just always struck me as a very interesting and very clear dynamic that was at play.
And at what point did the idea actually emerge of this totally diverse kind of characters meeting each other?
I think it was just when I drove past Home Depot at a kind of low point in my personal life years ago when I was living there, and maybe just idly thought to myself, God, I wonder if one of those guys would be interested in just having a chat. In an abstract way, I never really considered it, but just, and the transactional nature of the relationships between the white middle class and working class Latino community in West Hollywood is just fascinating to me. You see nannies who become so deeply embedded in the emotional life of the families they're taking care of, but yet they're undocumented and they don't have insurance and they don't have benefits, So there's like there's a financial exchange going on, but there's also a really deep emotional exchange that isn't being acknowledged, And also I remember walking past a garden of a apartment block in West Hollywood and seeing an elderly gay guy standing on the front stoop talking to his gardener while his gardener was working. And I went on and I went about my day, and I came back 2 hours later and the guy was still talking to the gardener, and you could see that the gardener kind of just wanted to do his work and get home to his family. And that speaks to me about the emotional exchange that is occurring beneath the surface of what seems like a transactional relationship, and I think it's unacknowledged in a way that I find fascinating. And so it sprang out of a couple of those little observations.
It's a huge thing in LA that the illegal, so-called illegal immigrants, they exist, as you say, like people turn a blind eye to it all the time.
They do. They do, because if they didn't, their economy would collapse. Nobody would pick their fruit. Nobody would park their cars. Nobody would serve them water in restaurants. And that's not to say that 100% of the Latino community that works there is working in the service industry or in agriculture, but it is a fact that those jobs are not being done by people who don't really belong to the Latino community. So I think it's very unfair and unacknowledged, the debt that is being owed,
Yeah.
So, it's a really interesting time over there, California is unbelievably bilingual down there, and so it's just I don't think a clear enough acknowledgement is being made of what is being given and taken in that relationship.
As I said, the dysfunction, it seems to all lie with our main character, with our weatherman, Sean. And the gravity and kind of the human kind of side is with Ernesto. Do you feel that that's something that exists in a very solid way in LA?
Which
that kind of the wealthier people, the ones with the bigger problems, emotional problems anyway, in terms of.
I mean, very possibly. I mean, certainly in this instance, I think that's true. But for me, it was just more interesting to poke around with the idea of two marginalized communities relating to each other. So you have a single gay man who's working in TV and living in LA and is completely isolated from his community for various reasons. I mean, there's an argument to be made that the kind of development of the apps and Grindr and all that has kind of succeeded in decimating the sense of community that gay people had around their shared spaces. So he's perhaps a victim of that, as well as circumstances in his personal life. And that's a big part of what's going on with him. But I think I loved the idea of two people connecting, out of the blue in a way that maybe was of mutual benefit, and the idea that maybe, it sounds kind of trite, but like the ways in which we're really not that different to each other are just so interesting to me,
Yeah, it's a very delicate piece, and it is very hard we can't talk too much about it. People should go and see it, enjoy it for how it just, as I said, it's there's a plot, but it's not a plot film. There's a mood to it. There's a sense of characters to it doing things that brings it along and does not try and kind of drown you with an opinion.
Yeah, well, this is the first. It's an interesting to hear you put it like that, but it's the first film I've made that kind of demanded from the very outset to unfold at its own pace, and for there to be very little intrusion by me or by the writer's hand narratively, and then in terms of how it's executed visually, it seemed to come with its own set of rules. Like, it was a very incredibly stubborn little piece of work, and I like that because it kind of what you're doing because you're being told it by the material itself.
You're being drawn along by what you're writing.
Yeah, or I mean, you're trying maybe other things that maybe break the form, and they're being spat back at you. Like there's no music in the film until Ernesto shows up, and that, in retrospect, when I say it like that, it sounds like a great piece of character-based rationalization, but it's literally the fact that I tried pieces of music in the film before and then they just spat back out at me, And I think that's a great privilege to get to as a filmmaker, where you have a piece of work that is its own stubborn little thing, and you just have to listen to it.
And at what point, obviously you wrote the script, you got Treasure and Robert and Rebecca involved. It must have been a hard sell. It's quite an unusual left-of-field movie. So
yeah, I wrote it. I went for a hike with my mate Stephen Beresford, who's another writer, and all we do when we go hiking is talk about story. And I told him some story from my personal life that has a very faint relation to this story, and he was like, "You should write about that." And I remember coming down off that hike, and this is before, maybe just after I'd shot Handsome Devil, and getting the plane home from LA that night and writing the outline for the whole film on the flight home. And then writing the script in a few weeks after and giving it to Rob and Rebecca, thinking there's no way that they will agree to undertake the challenge of making an independent American film from Ireland set in LA. Like, it's a crazy proposition, and they immediately were like, "Yeah, we have to do this." And I love them for that, because they've got a great bit of gumption. And equally, Screen Ireland, supported it, and other financiers from this part of the world, and that's great because you're kind of sneaking under the wire. You're going into LA and making a movie about LA from a purely European perspective, and it has optically it's an American indie, but it's an Irish film, and I love that.
Yeah.
It just feels slightly transgressive of us to do that.
It reminded me very superficially of another great American film made by John Schlesinger called Midnight Cowboy.
Yeah.
And again, so I remember someone saying, I don't know who it was, I read it somewhere a long time ago, that outsider view of a country is always the most interesting one.
Yeah, and another gay filmmaker as well, John Schlesinger.
Yeah.
No, that physical disparity between those two characters of Rats and the Cowboy were mentioned in casting our film as well. There's a great history of those odd couples in American cinema. Scarecrow was another one.
That's a brilliant film. I haven't seen that in a long time.
They're always like big guy, little guy. brown guy, white
Well,
guy.
that all goes back to Laurel and Hardy.
Yeah, it does actually. It does, and it's funny. I did. Alejandro was the first tape I saw, and he hadn't finished doing his name ident, and I was like, "That is the guy," just because of his eyes. But we then read him and a few other people against Matt, and Matt, who's just the perfect gentleman and understands.
Was Matt there from the very beginning?
Yeah, he was, but he was reading against these people in the room, and he said nothing about anybody. But when Alejandro did his thing with Matt and then left the room, Matt just turned to us and went, "He's quite like Buster Keaton." And it was the only comment he made about any of the actors. And I already knew I wanted to use Alejandro, but in that moment I was like...
It's really interesting because that was one of the things I loved what he did with his eyes. But it's something I noticed, and again, I said to you earlier, I watched A Handsome Devil today. I don't know what, again, obviously you don't manipulate and say, "I want you to do this with your face," but you're very good at getting those gestures that speak better than a line of dialogue can do.
Yeah.
It was a beautiful moment at the end of Handsome Devil where Andrew Scott introduced his boyfriend to Michael Hatton, and it made me laugh, it made me smile. It was a really gleeful little moment.
Yeah.
And I don't know how you got it out of them, but again, go see the film and you'll know what I'm talking about.
Well, we rehearsed that under the stands an hour before we shot it. Yeah.
Oh, really? So,
yeah, the three of them.
There's so much going on in that. And again, all those moments with Matt and those ultimately nearly cringing moments between him and Ernesto are just beautiful.
Yeah, no, and so much credit goes to the actors in both of those cases. Michael Hatton was, and Andrew, obviously. We're just, I remember rehearsing that scene. We were just standing up and trying to get it right, and there was a rhythm to the way the looks unfolded. And once we got it, it was like, yeah, that's going to work. And it means when you do it like that, you don't need too much coverage, which is the key for independent films. Like if you can answer those questions before you get on the set, then you're saving yourself some time. But
essentially, you've got three faces going on. You want to be able to read all of them at the same time.
Yeah, and they're all doing different things that tell the same story. But Alejandro's whole thing, when you meet him, is he's got this 1,000,000-watt smile. Like he's such a happy, lovely dude. And when I met him, I was like, "You're going to have to put that away for starters." We will be seeing that at 2 points in the film. But what the genius of him is that he's a comic actor who knows that when you're playing seriously, it doesn't mean that you turn it off. It just means you hide it. So there's little, you can see that he is alive, and that's what's... How do you direct that? You can't. But the idea is there is something in this character that is alive. He may not fully understand what's going on. He may not judge it. He may not hear it all, but he's alive and he's present. And that's all about listening,
The character's not... he's not stupid. He's a highly intelligent man.
Yeah.
In a certain circumstance. Without giving it away, there's a lovely moment with him and his wife.
Yeah.
That I think says...
Yeah,
volumes about him.
Yeah, absolutely.
That was really nice and very needed, and it was a great later moment.
Yeah. No, I mean he's just he's phenomenal. He's been acting for 35 years, and he's if you ask him what he's done, he says, "Yeah, I usually play the Mexican," and that's LA for you. Nobody's writing parts for these guys that aren't drug dealers or whatever, guys with leaf blowers in their hands.
And the really tough one's Robert Rodriguez. His cousin has them all.
Well, exactly, yeah. So Alejandro's done wonderful work down the years in small parts, and and there's a lot of terrific Latino actors in that city who are working all the time, but just it was nice to be able to get him into this one.
The rehearsal process, did you have one? And again, there was probably, as I said, it's such a kind of a chamber piece that... Tell me more about that.
We did about 3 days, I think. We rented this big house in Silver Lake that had our production offices and housed our crew, and then we had a little place downstairs, and Matt and Alejandro and I did some rehearsals. And to me, you don't want to exhaust it or be too prescriptive about what needs to happen. It's more just a question of running through scenes and answering a couple of questions as they pop up, and then leaving it slightly undercooked and letting it happen on the day. So we did some stuff like we did the song, we did Borderline over and over again, just to see how it was, there's the practicalities of how much of the song you're going to use and all that stuff. So we did those scenes, and it was very helpful just to dial in Alejandro's, the extent to which he would just listen and how that listening would manifest and how it would look. And then all the character stuff that Matt had to do was about Sean's physicality. There's a certain amount of kind of campness that's performative, and then there's a kind of slightly different Sean that's private, and
and it changes when he talks to different people as well.
Yeah, Yeah, and that's just that's the lived experience of every gay person. You know, they're hyper aware out of necessity of where they are, and I'm not saying they always or that it's right to, but it is, I think, very often a fact that their behaviour is, has to. They have to have it on a dial because it's a matter of self-protection. You know.
It was kind of like the two characters who were sort of a foil for him within the offices of the production company are both women.
Yes.
And again, he talks to them very differently.
Yeah, he does. That's Darcy Carden, who's doing great work in The Good Place at the moment, but and Wendy McLennan-Covey, who people know from The Goldbergs and also Bridesmaids. But yeah, he talks to them very differently. And the Sean that reads the weather is a different person, and the Sean that's alone in his house is a different person to the guy who then goes down to the hardware store where he is supposed to look like he's on enemy territory. And that's all based on me, I'm afraid.
Well, he's wonderful at taking chances as a character for all the isolation. He still goes there.
He's a relentless optimist, you know, and I always think that's the most tragic thing, is to have hope, you know, and that's Sean to a T, God bless him. Like the idea that he gets up and he meets the world every day, even though he is dying inside, you know.
Two other of your allies in your filmmaking I'd like to mention are John McPhillips and Cathal Watters.
Yeah,
because they
Watters,
both, and I really loved McPhillips' score.
Oh, it's amazing.
I haven't had a score stand out for me in an Irish film in a long time.
Yeah,
and it really jumped out at me.
Yeah,
as well as the cinematography, by the way. But let's do one at a time. You've obviously got. Yeah, I think these are 2 films you've made with the guys, or more.
Yeah, no, 2. And they do the same thing in a way, which I know sounds weird, but I mentioned Brief Encounter to them in terms of the lightly parodying the romantic plot of that, and to Cathal, my suggestion was that the gaze of the camera is explicitly queer in this film, and as such, the more lingering, subjective point of view is on Ernesto, it runs completely counter to whoever Matt Bomer has ever filmed, because he's obviously the kind of matinee idol, and I think Cathal took that and just ran with it and really understood. Like, there's 100 other examples, but Cahill's so intuitive about stuff. And we talked about a palette, and we talked about loneliness and how that is framed, and we also spoke about how much of the film would take place in a car and the challenges that presented. But his job that he's so good at is unifying all those different ideas into one manifestation of what this story is, and then all those things applied to John as well. He understood so well that the score was meant to kind of toe the line of a romantic Hollywood film, and then for the sense of it to become slightly warped. And he just, I think, executed that so well. Like, those things, I would write a long brief for the composer, and then sometimes you have to go back and forth and argue the toss. But John is the kind of guy who is as good at reading an email as he is at composing music, So yeah, I love those 2 guys. I think they seem to get what it is I'm trying to do.
Well, I mean, the requirement from everybody really is understanding, or not understanding, but having a sense of the story that's coming from your information and what you hope to achieve at the end of the day.
Yeah, but you'd be amazed how infrequently that is the objective of heads of department in filmmaking. Exactly, like, very often they have their eye on their show reel, or they have their eye on individual moments, and that goes for actors as well. Very often actors are looking out for moments, and very often cinematographers are looking out for moments and are looking forward to particular scenes that are days away. And that's not storytelling.
I think a real cinematographer understands that the entire film's a moment.
Yeah,
and that's exactly what came across. The story was being told, but everyone would seem so evenly. Oh, I'm saying this very badly, but very paced. Yeah, I mean, even the way that the house was shot, at a certain form and composition that really added to the loneliness. And by the way, you're very playful with symbolism. I just love some of your little symbolism, because it was quite nice, because you were going, okay, this is symbolism. Yeah, but you would give that little nod without saying too much about it to everybody out there. I really like that.
Yeah, no, thank you very much. That's really nice to hear. But I am very interested in interviewing all the heads of department that we hired, who a lot of whom were Angelino. We brought our camera department and first AD and sound over, and then blended them with American crew, and And foremost in my mind always, and the mind of Rob and Rebecca, was that we need to hire storytellers. So our production designer, it was terrific and completely understood the idea of the deck as a manifestation of this guy's emotional state, and told the story of the film that way. And same with wardrobe, and I love people who are interested in stories, and who acknowledge that, if you're buying the props for a film, you're telling the story, as much as the music is, or the script, and I think that's the best thing about actors as well, that they're not just kind of going, so my fight scene is 4 days away, guys like Alejandro are like, okay, well, I'm walking in here now with this bag, but wouldn't I see the view first? And that's catnip to me. I will just talk about that all day. Because it's purely like inside out acting,
So it was an actual house you found. I think you didn't build you didn't have that kind of budget.
No, we did not. No.
And it's a beautiful location.
Yeah.
But yet, as you say, it's like a lonely, eerie, despite the view.
Yeah, it's funny. Like, that's not a very expensive house, but because there's so much property in LA. But it's a beautiful house. I'd live there. But we wanted to find a big glass box. That was the idea. Something that's cantilevered, that suggests isolation, and something high up for sure. But I because of my knowledge of LA, I had the neighborhoods that I thought Sean's house was in, which is like Glassell Park or Highland Park or Eagle Rock, and I was adamant that that's where the house was going to be. And Rob, who is so patient, gave me the list of locations that we were wrecking, and the first one was on Mulholland Drive, which is in Hollywood. And I was like, for fuck's sake, is nobody going to listen to me? And of course, we drove up there, and this was the house we saw, and it was like, okay, maybe I was wrong.
That's nice that happens.
Exactly, yeah. But it's interesting. It must be the first film in the history of filmmaking to paint out the Hollywood sign, because it's right across the valley.
I think it's time someone did it.
Yeah, absolutely. But to me, that just suggested kind of alienating privilege. If a guy wakes up with that view of the Hollywood sign, then you're slightly thrown out of his story. And it's not a movie town in this film. It's just a big metropolis.
It avoids anything to do with that, really.
Yeah, it's for the same reason we don't have like Pink's Hot Dog or, Hollywood Boulevard or the Sea or any of that other stuff,
even when you went into the world of television, you really just kept it isolated to the weather.
Yeah.
There was no discussion of what news was really coming.
Thank God.
Yeah,
there's a little bit of improv in there that I was on Google for. I was like, what happens? Like, okay, maybe an avocado truck overturned. Like, I don't know what goes on in news stations. So, yeah, it's just as well it was only the weather. Yeah.
So, how much Irish crew did you bring over, by the way?
We brought the camera department and our first AD, Ben, and Hugh Fox, sound guy.
And was it a big...
And, I should say all the backroom staff, all the treasure people. So,
and what was it like working LA style compared to...
It was great. Everybody lived in that house. We rented like a big 5-story house in Silver Lake.
Okay.
So they all lived there. I cleared off for the shoot just because I go mental when I make films. So it was for their sake as much as mine. And also, you don't want the boss, quote unquote, to be living there. You're entitled when you go home after a hard day's work not to have to be looking at the fucking director.
Well, you kind of need to get away from where the story was to have a rest from the story as well.
That's true, yeah. And there's a couple of takeouts from the whole experience, and that is that Irish crews are amazing. That they work their arse off and they're really smart, you know. And Matt, I think if he was sitting here beside me, he'd be saying, like, Matt loved Cathal and Graham Scully and Hugh Fox and all those guys. He just thought they were incredible. And that fills your heart because it is an Irish film, and the definition of an Irish film is Irish creative talent, and so it really felt like we were doing the right thing when we brought those people over, and it was just, it was actually very moving to get to experience that with people that you've also made films in the pissing rain in Dublin with, so it was great, and the whole experience.
So the weather wasn't a distraction for them.
No, we definitely all got very badly sunburned. The poor makeup department were running around with tubes of Factor 50, squirting them at our necks. But we learned fast in that regard. Yeah. And the local LA crew we got blended with us very well. So the whole thing was really joyful. But I have to say, this is a film that's kind of born of, a semi-autobiographical experience of my time over there. So the greatest thrill for me was being on these streets, like say on a low loader, shooting a scene with 2 actors singing a song in a car and looking up, and being surrounded by my filmmaking friends, by Cathal and Graham and Rob and Rebecca and Sarah Gunn and everyone else, and looking up from the monitor, and it's magic hour in LA and you're looking up and you're actually driving down the street that you were living on when you were miserable 10 years ago. That's just...
it's a turnaround.
It's just wonderful. Yeah, it was a very, very emotional experience and I loved it.
So you've had a great response. You've won in Newport, am I right?
Yeah,
Best
yeah.
feature.
Yeah, that's right.
Has it had a release in America yet?
It's opening on Friday.
Oh, fantastic.
Yeah, so Matt is doing Stephen Colbert's show tomorrow, and he did Ellen, and he's did the Today Show as well. So he's doing all the American press. Alejandro's been doing a lot of the Latino press. So it opens in New York and LA, and then we'll hopefully expand after next week if it does well. So it's had a great response on the festival circuit, but the big test for me is if it connects with an American audience, and I really hope it does, because I think it has something to say.
Yeah, and it's because it avoids niche, and it's in danger of being people understanding it that way. It's not a niche film at all. It's a film about human beings getting on their lives.
Yeah. Although it's funny, if you try to sell a script like this, they're like, yeah, it's got a gay character, but it's not about the fact that he's gay, and then it's got a brown person, but it's not about the misery of the immigrant experience.
Well,
we can't really sell it.
Heads. Yeah.
You are, but then you say to them, well, maybe it's just a buddy movie, and they're like, yeah, but it can't be a buddy movie because one of them's gay and the other one's brown. And you're like, right. So those are the challenges you face in a conservative business, and I understand.
Do you remember a buddy movie from a million years ago, not very successful, with John Hurt and Ryan O'Neill as two cops and one was gay?
No. What was it called?
I can't remember. I think it was actually called something like Buddy, but I'm not sure.
Was Ryan O'Neill the gay character?
Ryan, no, it was John Hurt was the gay character. And
That's a miss.
I don't know. It just jumped back in my head there. I think it was pictured John Hurt on the wall outside.
Really? I
and
must
one of
see
those
that.
great actors. Yeah, it was one of those weird ones that ends up in a double bill back in the day. That's how old it is. Probably 79.
I'd love to see it.
Yeah, I would too. Actually, now I've mentioned it. It's been a million years.
No, I'd love to do a buddy movie. I'd love to program a buddy movie season because I think it's a really interesting genre.
Yes, it's one of my favourites actually.
Yeah, I loved Booksmart.
I haven't seen that yet.
Incredible.
Yeah,
incredible.
But
film.
You mentioned Sideways earlier, and I think definitely it falls in a place close to that. Again, they're two very different films in the end, but that kind of hanging out with people. There's not enough films where you get to hang out with people.
Yeah.
And people are just waiting, okay, what's going to happen next? What's going to happen next? This one doesn't work that way. And it's very, very hard to do that kind of low-key storytelling. Yeah,
well, I think the only way it works is if you engage people's preconceptions. That's what gets them leaning in. And Alexander Payne is a kind of a master at that. He knows what you think about characters at certain points, and then he subverts that or advances that. And that's what causes you to lean in, like Election and Sideways and films like that. You can tell that he knows what you think, and he's one little step ahead of you in terms of that. And I think that's how buddy movies work. You have to have a set of assumptions established and then have them pulled away as the thing goes on. Like that's what gives it its emotion. That's why Scarecrow is so good, because you think you know everything about these guys, and then the rug is pulled from under you as you go along, and that's what gives it its engine. Or like famously, obviously, Midnight Run.
Yeah,
where you think you know it all.
It's a beautiful.
Yeah, and I love those films because they just on the surface they're so simple.
Yeah,
it's two guys.
It's funny, and I suppose one of the great ones is The Odd Couple. But I just watched recently it's my film I have to watch at least every Tuesday, and it's an odd buddy movie because it's not really a buddy movie.
No,
but the Sunshine Boys.
Oh, I love that. Yeah.
That's a really the oddest buddy movie in the world because they ain't buddies.
No, they're not buddies. No. Also, With Nell and I is a good one.
That's a great example.
Yeah. I do love them, and I think I love them because friendship is very important to me.
Did you get the marketing people then to decide? Okay, look, we'll try the buddy approach, or are they what's the marketing?
No, I think, and I understand it. Listen, I was being kind of facetious with that, but I think it's being marketed as a film that will appeal to an LGBT audience, which I hope is the case, and also it's being marketed to Latinos, to a Latino audience, and I think it'll appeal to them too. So, who knows how it goes?
And over here, what do you think?
Over here, it's being marketed to 100% of all human beings.
Yeah, human beings. There's a great marketing niche.
Yep. So not everybody.
And on that note, John, I think thank you so much for coming in. It's a pleasure talking about it, and good luck with the next project. I hope it goes great.
Thank you. Cheers. Thanks very much.